Mehta today. He's the founder of Service Space. We're going to be talking about kindness and generosity and non-monetary wealth, and especially those small, simple acts of kindness that may seem invisible, but that actually can have enormous effects on society and politics. So a little bit about Service Space. It's a project incubator, global. It's got something like 500,000 members. What's really amazing to me, what really impresses me about Nipun and this project, he's got a lot of awards, the Dalai Lama Unsung Heroes Award, things like that. But what really impressed me is just that from the beginning, he's refused to sell out or monetize his success in any way. Makes him feel like a real brother to me and somebody that disarms my cynicism and inspires a lot of other people too. So I'm really happy to have Nipun on the show. If you want to find out more about him and his organization, go to servicespace.org.
So here we are, Charles Eisenstein speaking with Nipun Mehta. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
And Nipun, we've met a couple times now, not many times though, twice I think.
Yeah.
But I knew about you a long time, even before it was called Service Space. You called it Charity Focus or something.
Yeah. Wow, well, that's way back in the days.
Yeah, and there was something about it that I found, like there was kind of like this almost ascetic rigor or kind of vigilance that appealed to me somehow, because you said something like, we will never monetize, we will never cash in, and like on the one hand, that I'm a little bit wary of that kind of like, we're going to be perfect, but there just seemed like a kind of purity around it that appealed to me, like it was coming from a deep insight into the whole psychology of money. So that's like my earliest impression of you. And then, I was at your house one time and then we were at that event, but anyway, what is,
no, it's been beautiful. I think for us, it's not about being perfect per se, but I think it's about aspiring to really broaden the idea of capital. I think we oftentimes just think money is like, even to create social change, you need to have money. Even to, for your livelihood, you obviously need to have money. But I think expanded scope far beyond, and we minimize the scope of so many other kinds of capital. So I think our commitment was, let's explore these other kinds of capital. And that's been, a 15-year journey, and it's a process because there's so many things that the traditional sort of systems are very good at, and there are so many paths, and part of the reason why they're good at that is because there's so many paths that have been grooved already. And when you think of these other kinds of capital, they're sort of, off the beaten track, and we don't know, but we as humanity ought to discover them. We ought to pave those paths and make it easier for the next generation. So that's been our endeavor, and it continues to be 15 years later. So.
Or rediscover them or regenerate them. Maybe they're not new.
Oh yeah, I think as Gandhi said, all this stuff is old as hills, but it's forgotten. So how do you? And I think there's also a challenge of creativity. Like how do you manifest them? How do you make them applicable in today's era? I think Gandhi did it so brilliantly. It's not like nonviolence was new, but he was able to demonstrate its practice in a setting like India and South Africa before that. In a way that was relevant to that culture. So I think those are that's the call to creativity that we have.
Yeah, it's definitely not new. I mean, it's in the New Testament. It's in like the Tao Te Ching. It's super old. So what are some of the new and ancient kinds of capital that you're talking about?
I think the biggest capital is this idea of inner transformation. And again, this is probably more ancient than ancient itself. I don't even know how to put a timeline on it, but I think we're wired with this idea of I think an innate propensity towards aligning ourselves with the flow of nature. I mean, it's hard to describe these things, but I think there's a tendency, there's an innate awareness in us to know when we're off, and I think we want to align with that. We're wired in that way, and so I think, how can we use service for us, for me? The journey has been, how do you use service as a way to create that inner transformation and align with, be in harmony with nature. Nature not just on the outside at the level of, trees and rivers, but also nature within us. And so I think that's been, that's been a significant part of the journey. And that's a significant resource, I think, that we often underestimate. Like, we think that, to get people to do stuff, to create change in the world, we need to motivate, we need to have capacity, and that capacity is so rooted in a kind of material resource. Like, money is certainly a manifestation of that. But there are these intrinsic incentives that, how many hours are donated just on Wikipedia alone? At some level, I think that's a resource that's always been around, but it's under-tapped, underutilized. And I think what's new is how technology allows us to creatively put those together and manifest new solutions. That, I think, is a very, the way we can organize people and small amounts from many people is a capacity we didn't have prior to the internet, for instance, and now we have that capacity.
I like that I'm intrigued by your use of the word capital to refer to inner transformation. It seems like, so when I think of capital, I don't know, etymologically, I guess it means the head. Decapitate is to remove, but to me, I guess in this context, capital means a form of wealth that generates other wealth. So inner transformation, or these states that are accessible through service, through kindness, are indeed, like, there are kind of wealth. Like, you feel wealthy when you're doing that, and they also generate more wealth, for your life and for other people. Is that what you have in mind when you talk about capital?
I mean, I haven't looked at the the root of the word. Thank you for sharing that. I didn't know, but the way I mean it is, I think that you can create a lot of value with that resource, and it's regenerative. So I think the more I smile, the more I want to smile. The more I do an act of service, the more I want to do an act of service. The more I'm kind, the more I want to be kind. So I think that capacity where versus, like, it's I need to be motivated by so many other things. If I'm at a corporation, for example, you get a salary, and then if to do harder work, they give you more money, right? And a promotion, which kind of pads your ego, and that's a very different process. I mean, that's good for some things in the world, but this is an entirely different process where you're rewarded just intrinsically by the mere act of doing it, and it's so generative. So it's like this incredible capacity that we can unlock to alleviate so much suffering in the world.
Right, because you're not saying practice acts of kindness and service because of this thing you're going to get in return. You're not offering an extrinsic motivation, which is kind of, to take the logic of capitalism and exchange and transaction, and to kind of export it onto some other realm and say, okay, now we finally have a reason why you should be kind. Like, we're I think moving beyond reasons in the normal sense of here's how it's going to benefit your, quote, rational self-interest. Go ahead. What do you say when someone says, well, Nipun, why should I do it, man? Why should I perform selfless acts and anonymous acts of kindness,
Sure. I mean, I would just say, go out and try it and see how it feels. And it never fails, right? Like, it's one of these things where if you actually pay toll for the car behind you, and that person never actually comes back and closes that feedback loop in a material sense, you still feel like an expansion in your heart, in your being. And that is our true trigger, I think, for continued acts in the future. So I think it really starts small. So before, if your argument is you should go out and change the world and there's all this suffering, I think that is a much more difficult argument, and I think it also creates so many layers of abstraction. Whereas here, it's like, no matter who you are, no matter what position you're in, you can do an act of kindness. And when you do that, that itself will be the trigger. You'll want to do more. Just try it out. And there's so much research around this. I think Michael Norton at Harvard did this thing even with money. He says, you can either go shopping with this money or give it away.
Yeah.
And when you give it away, like, your brain just feels better, even if you're a skeptic going into it, So I think there's something really deep and true about that.
I want to read you like a little bit of a little essay I wrote on. It was the topic was philanthropy, and charity, philanthropy, and individual acts of kindness. And I'm kind of like setting up a cynical leftist critique.
Okay.
So sure, treating the domestic help well, giving to charity, housing the homeless, even walking an old lady across the street, these are all nice, but they do nothing to change the exploitative, ecocidal system of global capitalism. On the contrary, charity, philanthropy, and individual acts of kindness only perpetuate that system. Here's how. 1, by ameliorating some of its worst consequences, they make capitalism all the more palatable. 2, they divert altruistic energy toward relatively innocuous goals instead of toward addressing the systemic foundations of injustice. 3, they appease the conscience and make one's own complicity more acceptable. And 4, they generate a codependent relationship with the needy, in which the charitable enterprise depends for its survival on the very conditions it ostensibly seeks to address. So, what can you say to my channeled inner leftist critic there?
I mean, if the critic is saying, look, these things are, what impact is this going to have in the world? And I think that's really at the core of it. It's like you're still perpetuating the whole system. And I think that if you look at the world on the outside, that yes, if the greatest impact of what you do is the ripple that it creates on the outside, I think all those critiques would be legitimate. But there's also another thing that happens, which is actually a ripple effect of what happens on the inside. So because of that act of kindness, my inner ecology completely shifts. And when that inner ecology completely shifts, I have a new lens with which to look at the world. So I may have done an act of kindness that keeps me in a current system, but because it opened me up, now I'm going to connect with that other person in a very different way, or I'm going to notice a homeless person that otherwise I wouldn't have even noticed. And that starts to create a whole entire, chain of different possibilities. So I think if you discount the inner, then that critique is valid. But if you really start to look at the powerful transformation that happens within, and I can tell you from my own experience, like one of the things that happens with the smallest act of kindness, the most inconsequential thing that I do, even when no one is looking, like I just care for somebody, or maybe it's even more subtler than that. I just wish well for somebody. One of the things that happens on the outside, who knows whether it makes an impact or not? I mean, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. There's a lot of science around all of the whole spectrum. But what happens on the inside is very real and is very transformative. Like I notice when I do an act of kindness in me, my mind stills. Because because the pattern of my mind is me, me, me. And now when I do an act of kindness for someone else, even if it's anonymous, that pattern shifts from me to we. Right? So because now I'm giving to this other person. It's almost like giving to this person is my left hand or my right hand. And when I do that, it changes my inner composition. And when it does that, I fall into a greater interconnectedness. And as I do that, my mind quiets down to the degree that I fall into a deeper interconnectedness, my mind quiets down. And that quiet mind is an incredible resource, because that changes how you look at everything, and you're no longer in a rush. Gandhi, one of the things he would say is that if you, he used to walk really fast, and so someone's like, it's like, hey man, what's the rush, dude? Why are you in a rush all the time? He's like, oh no, rushing would be a form of violence. I'm just walking fast. Right? So this idea of, oh, why are you, we get so busy, but there's this, I'm active, I'm not busy. And I think that's where you can do the same amount of stuff in the world, but with less mental residue. And I think that impact, if we discount that completely, like if the idea of an act of kindness is just to change the world on the outside, then I think it's missing a huge part of the equation. Clearly, right, is that intention, but you have to honor the inside too.
Because usually the act of kindness is something that in the grand scheme of things is tiny, insignificant. And sometimes the rational mind cannot say how it could possibly have any macroscopic impact. Like what if you're, like one of the most beautiful acts of kindness I've been privy to is my wonderful ex-wife, Patsy, bringing soup to this was 10 years ago, to one of her real estate clients who was basically dying, and like there was nothing in it for Patsy. Like the house wasn't going to sell. I mean, this was like a complete, and giving soup, like some nourishing egg drop soup, like this, she's Chinese, like, so of course you give someone some nourishing egg drop soup to a woman who's like malnourished, and eating chocolate bars and soda just because there's no one to take care of her, and giving her this soup, and she's going to die anyway. Like, what good could this possibly do? How is this going to help climate change or save the whales or reform the prison system or have any impact on the universe whatsoever? If you depend on it having some calculable impact, then you're not going to actually be very kind very often. But I think, on some level, we understand that these acts are significant, that they send some kind of ripple out into the world. And like you were saying, they change something on the inside. And I think that they're kind of practice. In fact, spiritual traditions will even call that a practice, karma yoga, but it actually is a practice for, in any situation, acting in a way that isn't selfish. And when like the tanks are rolling down the streets and someone has to stand up a tank, or someone has to step up politically in that moment of people power, then the same state of being that results in an invisible act of kindness in one circumstance will result in a political action in another circumstance.
Exactly.
And I think it's not only internal, because, when you look at the politics of our day and why people are supporting, drone bombings, and all the other horrors that are happening, and keeping the Mexicans out, and all of the vicious politics, it's all coming from fear. And what makes people so afraid? What makes people so disconnected? I think when someone receives kindness or even witnesses kindness or generosity, that kind of it's this data point that doesn't fit into the world of fear. So I think it's political as well.
Yeah, and I think the order of it matters, right? So I think if we start from personal to to community and then political, I think that's a very different pathway to social change than to start with political because everything's messed up, and then to like get to your local community, and then to, if at all, to your own personal self. I mean, Howard Thurman had this beautiful quote. He says, don't go out and ask what the world needs. Instead go out and do what makes you come alive, because what the world needs most are people who have come alive. And that aliveness, even if you give soup to a person that you feel is completely immeasurable in the matrix of the universe, I actually don't think it works so literally like that. And I think if you look at all these people that have created sustainable social change, I think they've done it why by honoring the small. Like, I think if you discount the small, it just, you can't, as Mother Teresa very beautifully said, you know, in her famous quote, you can do no great things, you know, like only small things with great love. But I think it's a function of our collective ego and how we honor that ego so much that we often get greedy even about social change. And we say that, you know, my identity is so vested into that act that, like, I want to go out, I got to have an impact in the world, I got to leave a legacy behind. And, you know, I was with Steve Wozniak, and someone asked him, he's the co-founder of Apple. This was in Malaysia, and someone asked him a question, hey, what do you think about your legacy? You know, because clearly Jobs and Woz, and, you know, there's this whole thing between them, and less so now after Steve has passed away. But he says, you know, forget, what legacy, man? I'm going to be a bunch of ashes, and that's fine. Like, I don't think about my legacy. And it was just a complete, like, it stunned everybody, you know, because everyone's looking for that kind of an engagement. And I think there are people out there that are not just motivated by the size of that impact, because impact is completely deceiving. You know, I gave this talk recently on humility, and one of the things I spoke about was an anecdote that my mom would tell me when I was young. It's like in the Gita, in the Mahabharata, which is this Indian epic. Krishna is on a chariot, and there's a dog on the chariot, and the dog notices that when it moves its tail to the left, you know, the chariot goes to the left, and when it moves its tail to the right, the chariot goes to the right. And there's this, you know, it happens a couple times, and the dog starts thinking, you know, I'm actually controlling the chariot, you know, and we do this mix-up between causation and correlation all the time. I mean, even when we have these, even at a large scale, we oftentimes, you know, confuse just mere correlations with actual causation. So really, I think it's an arrogant position to think that you can go out and change the world, but I think it's also equally disempowering to think, hey, man, I don't matter. So I think there's a balance between the two that we have to explore.
Yeah, and the way I deal with that balance or that paradox is to think in terms of service to that which wants to be born, rather than, you know, on the one extreme, you know, me, the you know, technologist, the separate self manipulating the universe to, you know, to fit my design, or being totally passive and letting nature take its course. It's a co-creative relationship, and feeling into what wants to happen that's calling my gifts into service to that thing.
Yeah, and I think here's the thing, actually, that's a very important point, because how will you know that? How will you know that that inner voice is a function of your ego, or is it a function of being an instrument of the larger organizing principles of the universe? And that discernment is directly proportional, at least in my experiences, from what I've heard from people I respect also, that discernment between the two, between your two inner voices, so to speak, is directly proportional to the quietness of your mind, to your alignment with, you know, in harmony with nature. And so that small act of giving soup to somebody who might be dying, its greatest impact may not be feeding that person who's going to be hungry again tomorrow and who's going to be passing away soon. Its greatest impact may be that you've quieted the mind, you've learned how to discern between the voice of the ego and the voice of nature, and then you become a part of a much larger design. And in that sense, it's like, man, it's uncomparable, right? If you really saw that, you can understand why Mother Teresa would say, well, you can do no great things, man. Just do small things with great love, right? And because that's, you know, because I think it's an arrogant position to think that you even know how to impact the world. I mean, it's
and for a lot of people, like this kind of background urgency that whatever you do, it has to be scalable, it has to scale up, it has to go viral. Otherwise, it was kind of a waste. It didn't go anywhere. Like, that can be really paralyzing.
Yeah.
Because not everybody's thing can go viral, you know, only a few can.
By definition, you know.
Yeah, right. Hey, Nipun, have you like recently, have there been any any stories of kindness that you've witnessed that have really kind of impacted you and made you like really affirmed, what you're speaking about?
So many. I mean, they happen all the time. Let's see which one. I'll tell you one. I'll tell you two.
Okay.
It's hard to pick stories, right? Stories are great.
But whatever's alive for you right now.
Yeah. No, one is a tangible one. One is a subtler one. The tangible one was I was in a meeting with this guy. Second time I was meeting him. First time one-on-one. Second time meeting him. We're having dinner. He's probably one of the richest guys in the country. And he, at some point, says, Nipun, I'm very good at giving. He's a very generous guy, but I'm very bad at receiving. And he says, what is your advice on that? And I said, well, you just got to give more, but you have to give in a different way where you're tuned in to what's happening on your inside. Because as you're tuned into what happens on the inside, you will see, at least I have seen from my experience, that as you give on the outside, well, you think you're the giver, but immediately in that moment you are receiving, through your own inner transformation, and it's very hard to compare that inner and the outer. So I basically said, to learn how to receive, give more, but give in a way with an understanding, with a lens towards the inside. And so we have this whole thing. We have this wonderful conversation, and we went back and forth on that. And then at the end, it's time